24 heavy metal icons you didn't know were secretly gay. What if some of the most fearless heavy metal legends were hiding a truth that could shock the entire rock world? These are the same artists who smashed guitars, ruled chaotic stages, and built a reputation for living louder than anyone else. Fans thought they knew everything about them, but behind the screaming crowds, wild tours, and thunderous riffs, a different story was unfolding quietly for years. Some kept it hidden to survive in a tough industry. Others revealed it when the timing finally felt right. And once you hear these stories, the way you see heavy metal might change forever. Because today, you're about to uncover 24 heavy metal icons you never knew were secretly gay. 24. Hunter Hendrix. Heavy metal has always been a place where artists push boundaries, but sometimes the most unexpected shifts happen quietly. Hunter Hendrix, the mind behind the avant-garde black metal project Liturgy, represents one of those moments where the genre began to change in ways many fans did not see coming. Known for complex ideas about sound, philosophy, and spirituality in metal, Hunter Hendrix built music that felt different from traditional black metal while still carrying its intensity and emotional weight. What makes this story connect strongly with the theme of hidden LGBTQ figures in heavy music is that Hunter Hendrix later came out as transgender. In a genre that often adhered tightly to rigid identities, this revelation surprised many listeners who had focused solely on the band's unique sound. Instead of fitting neatly into the classic image of black metal, a Hunter Hendrix expanded the genre's representation. Liturgy's music mixes chaos with beauty, creating long compositions that feel both aggressive and uplifting at the same time. As the band gained attention in underground metal circles, the conversation around identity also began to shift. Fans started realizing that the world of heavy music had always included people with very different experiences and backgrounds. Today, Hunter Hendrix stands as one of the most unusual and thought-provoking figures in modern metal. Through bold music and personal honesty, this artist helped show that heavy metal is not limited by old expectations. The genre continues evolving, and stories like this remind listeners that some of the most groundbreaking figures were quietly reshaping metal all along. Before moving forward, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next surprising story in this countdown. 23. Melissa Moore. Extreme metal has always had an aura of mystery around it, and few bands captured that feeling quite like Absu. Known for their intense black and thrash metal sound, the group built a reputation for powerful music filled with mythological themes and fast, aggressive performances. Among the musicians connected to this world was Melissa Moore, a guitarist who later became an important example of how identities inside heavy metal were more diverse than many people assumed. For years, fans knew Melissa Moore primarily through her work in the extreme metal scene. The music itself often grabbed attention first with rapid guitar work and dark atmosphere that defined the style of bands like Absu. However, what many listeners did not initially realize was that Melissa Moore would later come out as a transgender woman, revealing a personal story that had remained largely hidden during earlier stages of her career. This moment was significant for heavy metal culture. The genre is often portrayed as rigid or resistant to change, yet musicians like Melissa Moore showed that artists within the scene were navigating their own journeys behind the scenes. Her transition and openness brought visibility to transgender representation within extreme metal, something that had rarely been discussed before in such a visible way. Over time, stories like hers helped shift how fans viewed the community around metal music. Instead of a single identity, the evolving scene began to reflect a wider range of voices and experiences. Melissa Moore's place in this conversation highlights how heavy metal has always contained deeper stories that many listeners only discover years later. 22. Skin. During the rise of alternative metal and heavy rock in the 1990s, one voice stood out instantly. Skin, the powerful frontwoman of Skunk Anansi, brought a level of energy and emotion that few performers could match. Her band blended heavy guitars with bold lyrics and striking stage presence, creating music that resonated with audiences who wanted something raw, intense, and different from mainstream rock at the time. Beyond the music itself, Skin became an important figure because she has always been open about her identity as a queer woman. In an era when many artists in heavy music avoided discussing personal topics like sexuality, her openness quietly challenged expectations. Instead of fitting into the traditional mold often associated with rock and metal performers, she showed that strength and individuality could take many forms. Skunk Anansi gained international attention with songs that carried powerful messages and unforgettable performances. Fans were drawn not only to the band's heavy sound, but also to the honesty behind the music. Skin's voice, both literally and symbolically, represented confidence in being authentic within a scene that sometimes struggled with acceptance. As time passed, her influence became clearer. Many younger artists in rock and metal began speaking more openly about identity, inspired by pioneers who had already taken that step years earlier. Skin's place in this list reflects how some of the most impactful figures in heavy music were not only shaping the sound of the genre, but also helping transform its culture from within. 21. J.D. Samson. Heavy music has always connected with movements that challenge expectations, and J.D. Samson became one of the artists who pushed those cultural boundaries forward. Known for work with Le Tigre and involvement in alternative rock scenes that influenced heavier music audiences, J.D. Samson brought activism, identity, and creative experimentation into spaces that often overlapped with the broader world of rock and metal fans. What makes J.D. Samson especially important in the context of hidden LGBTQ figures is their identity as a non-binary musician. At a time when conversations around gender identity were far less visible in mainstream music discussions, J.D. Samson openly expressed ideas that encouraged people to think differently about how artists present themselves. This presence gradually reached audiences connected to heavier genres as well, where fans were beginning to explore more diverse voices within the community. Le Tigre's music mixed strong rhythms, bold lyrics, and energetic performances that attracted listeners who enjoyed alternative and punk-inspired sounds often associated with the edges of metal culture. As these scenes overlapped, J.D. Samson's role helped expand what representation looked like in music spaces that had long been dominated by traditional expectations. Over the years, the influence of artists like J.D. Samson became clearer. By openly embracing identity and creativity, they contributed to a shift in how fans understood the people behind the music. Stories like this remind listeners that heavy music culture has always been shaped by individuals who were willing to challenge norms while still delivering powerful artistic expression. 20. Patrick Wolf. Heavy music is not always about distortion and speed. Sometimes it is about emotion, intensity, and fearless expression, and that is exactly where Patrick Wolf fits into this conversation. Known for blending different styles like electronic, orchestral, and alternative rock, Patrick Wolf created music that carried a dramatic and almost cinematic feeling. While he may not come from traditional heavy metal bands, his influence reached listeners who enjoy darker, emotionally powerful music often connected to the heavier side of rock culture. Patrick Wolf has been openly gay and has spoken about identity, creativity, and personal struggles throughout his career. At a time when many artists still felt pressure to hide parts of themselves, his openness made him stand out. His songs often explore vulnerability, transformation, and individuality, themes that resonate strongly with audiences who also connect with the emotional depth found in heavy music. As his career grew, Patrick Wolf built a reputation for artistic bravery. Instead of following trends, he shaped a unique path that combined theatrical visuals, deeply personal lyrics, and experimental sound. And many fans who discovered his work through alternative and darker music scenes began to see how artists like him expanded the emotional range connected to heavy music culture. Over the years, Patrick Wolf's presence helped remind listeners that influence in heavy music does not always come from traditional metal bands alone. Sometimes the artists who quietly reshape the culture are those who dare to be completely honest about who they are while creating music that feels powerful and unforgettable. 19. Pete Shelley. The history of heavy music cannot be told without mentioning the explosive energy of punk, and Pete Shelley was one of the figures who helped ignite that movement. As the frontman of Buzzcocks, he played a major role in shaping punk rock. Riffs, a style that later crossed paths with early metal scenes and influenced countless heavy bands. The fast guitars, raw emotion, and rebellious spirit of punk opened the door for the heavier sounds that followed. Pete Shelley also stood out because he openly identified as bisexual during a time when very few musicians in rock or metal were willing to talk about sexuality publicly. In the late 1970s and beyond, this honesty was unusual in the music world, especially in scenes that often celebrated toughness and rebellion, but rarely discussed identity in such direct ways. Buzzcocks music mixed catchy melodies with sharp, emotional lyrics, creating songs that still inspire artists across many genres today. As punk began blending with heavier sounds, and the influence of musicians like Pete Shelley became part of the broader culture surrounding metal and alternative rock. Over time, people began to realize that pioneers of heavy music were not always fitting the stereotypes associated with the genre. Pete Shelley helped prove that authenticity and openness could exist alongside loud guitars and rebellious music. His story shows how some of the earliest figures connected to heavy music culture were already challenging expectations and quietly reshaping the scene for future generations. 18. Lzzy Hale. Modern heavy rock and metal continue to evolve, and Lzzy Hale has become one of the strongest voices leading that change. As the frontwoman of Hailstorm, she is known for powerful vocals, energetic performances, and a commanding presence on stage that fits perfectly within today's heavy music scene. The band's music mixes hard rock and metal influences, creating songs that feel both aggressive and emotionally driven. Lzzy Hale has openly spoken about being bisexual, something that adds another layer to her role in modern metal culture. While earlier decades often discouraged artists from discussing identity, newer generations of musicians like Lzzy Hale have helped create a space where authenticity is celebrated. Her openness encourages fans to feel comfortable being themselves while connecting with music that carries strength and intensity. Hailstorm's rise in the heavy music world brought Lzzy Hale into the spotlight as a respected performer who stands shoulder to shoulder with many major metal acts. Her songwriting often reflects personal experiences, determination, and emotional honesty, which resonates strongly with listeners who see heavy music as more than just sound. Over time, her influence has grown beyond the band itself. Many fans now view Lzzy Hale as part of a new era where heavy metal is becoming more inclusive while still holding on to its powerful identity. Her presence in this list highlights how the modern metal world continues to reveal stories that once remained hidden in earlier generations of the genre. 17. Steve Brooks. The world of sludge metal and heavy alternative rock often feels gritty, loud, and deeply emotional, and Steve Brooks became an important figure within that atmosphere. Known for his work with Torcha, he helped shape a style of music that blends crushing riffs with melodic elements, creating a sound that stands out in modern heavy music. Torcha built a loyal following because their songs carry both heaviness and an unexpected sense of atmosphere. Steve Brooks is openly gay, something that many fans may not have expected when first discovering the intense and often masculine-sounding world of sludge metal. For years, the heavy music scene carried the image of being dominated by certain stereotypes, yet musicians like Steve Brooks quietly showed that the reality was much broader than people assumed. As Torcha gained recognition, their music became known for balancing heaviness with creativity. The band's approach proved that metal could evolve while still staying powerful. Behind that sound was an artist who was also helping shift how people viewed identity in the genre. Over time, stories like Steve Brooks have become more visible as fans look back at the people who helped shape modern heavy music. His presence in the scene demonstrates that authenticity authenticity and musical strength can exist together without compromise. The heavy music world continues to grow, and artists like him remind listeners that many important figures were already redefining what metal culture looked like long before the conversation became more public. 16. Jonsi heavy music is often associated with loud guitars and aggressive rhythms, but sometimes its influence spreads through atmosphere and emotion rather than sheer volume. That is where Jonsi, the distinctive voice behind Sigur Rós, enters the conversation. His music may not follow the traditional blueprint of heavy metal, yet the emotional intensity and cinematic sound of Sigur Rós have deeply influenced artists and listeners connected to darker and more atmospheric sides of heavy music. Jonsi has been openly gay and has spoken about living honestly while creating deeply personal music. For many fans discovering his story later, it became clear that the world surrounding heavy and emotional rock had always been more diverse than it appeared on the surface. His openness quietly challenged expectations in scenes that were often perceived as rigid or traditional. Sigur Rós created long, immersive compositions that felt almost otherworldly. The band's sound carried a powerful emotional weight, which resonated with audiences who also enjoyed progressive and atmospheric metal styles. Over time, musicians across different genres began citing this kind of emotional depth as an inspiration. As listeners explored the wider influences behind heavy music, they realized that artists like Jonsi played a role in shaping how intensity and emotion could exist together. His presence in this list highlights how some of the most unexpected figures connected to heavy music culture were also helping redefine what authenticity looked like within the broader rock and metal world. 15. Janis Joplin. Before many modern metal vocalists began pushing their voices to the limit, there was Janis Joplin. Her raw power, emotional delivery, and fearless stage presence helped shape how rock singers approached intensity. While she came from a blues rock background, her influence reached far into the world of heavy music, inspiring countless performers who later brought similar passion into hard rock and early metal. Janis Joplin's personal life also added another dimension to her story. She was known for having relationships with both men and women, something that was rarely discussed openly in the music industry during her era. For audiences looking back today, it reveals that LGBTQ identities were already present in the foundations of rock culture that later helped build heavy metal. Her performances were electric, whether singing powerful ballads or high-energy songs. She brought an honesty that fans could instantly feel. That emotional intensity became one of the traits that later defined many heavy music vocalists who followed her path. As the history of heavy music continues to be explored, Janis Joplin stands out as a figure who influenced not only sound, but also the spirit of expression in rock culture. Her openness and fearless personality quietly challenged norms during a time when the industry was far less accepting. Stories like hers remind listeners that some of the roots of heavy music were already connected to artists who lived outside traditional expectations. 14. Bob Mould. When people talk about the bridge between punk, alternative rock, and heavier music, Bob Mould often appears in the conversation. As a key member of Husker Du, he helped create a sound that combined raw punk energy with louder, more aggressive guitar work that later influenced alternative metal and many heavy bands. The intensity of his songwriting and playing style made a lasting mark on the evolution of rock music. Bob Mould is openly gay and came out publicly during the 1990s. At that time, discussions about sexuality in rock and metal scenes were still limited, which made his openness meaningful for many fans who were discovering these genres. His decision to live honestly showed that artists shaping heavy music culture were not always fitting into the stereotypes associated with the scene. The music of Husker Du carried emotional weight and urgency that resonated strongly with listeners who were drawn to heavier sounds. Many later musicians cited Bob Mould's work as an influence when building the alternative and heavy rock movements that emerged in the following decades. Looking back, his role in music history goes beyond just the sound he helped create. Bob Mould's presence in the scene showed that authenticity could exist alongside loud guitars and powerful performances. His story adds another layer to the understanding of how heavy music evolved, shaped by individuals who were both musically groundbreaking and personally courageous. 13. Sean Reinert. Progressive metal has always been known for pushing boundaries, and Sean Reinert was one of the musicians who helped shape that direction. As the drummer for Cynic, he played a crucial role in creating a sound that blended technical skill with futuristic ideas. The band's music stood apart from traditional metal, mixing complex rhythms, atmospheric melodies, and philosophical themes that attracted listeners looking for something deeper. For many years, fans admired Sean Reinert mainly for his incredible drumming ability. However, in 2014, he and fellow Cynic member Paul Masvidal openly shared that they were gay. This moment surprised parts of the metal community because it revealed a side of the scene that had rarely been discussed openly before. Sean Reinert's contribution to metal went far beyond just performance. His innovative style influenced drummers across progressive and technical metal, helping expand what musicians believed was possible within the genre. At the same time, his openness about identity added another important layer to his legacy. As more fans learned about the people behind the music they loved, stories like Sean Reinert's became part of a larger realization. Heavy metal had always included individuals from different backgrounds and experiences, even if those stories were not always visible at first. His place in this list reflects how some of the most respected musicians in metal were also quietly reshaping how the community understood itself. 12. Joe Bench. Heavy metal has always carried a reputation for being intense, loud, and often dominated by a certain image of toughness. But the story of Joe Bench quietly and powerfully challenges that idea. As the longtime bassist for Bolt Thrower, she helped build one of the most respected sounds in death metal. The band became known for crushing riffs, thunderous rhythm, and music inspired by themes of war and strength. Through it all, Joe Bench stood out not only because of her skill, but because she became one of the very few women in extreme metal during that era. Beyond the music, another part of her story remained less discussed for many fans. Joe Bench is openly lesbian, something that surprised people who assumed the heavy metal world looked only one way. In reality, her presence showed that the genre had always been more diverse than it appeared on the surface. Instead of making headlines about her personal life, she focused on the music and continued performing with confidence and consistency. Her bass playing became a core part of Bolt Thrower's identity. The deep, powerful tone she delivered helped create the heavy atmosphere that fans loved. Over time, listeners began to recognize how important her role was in shaping the band's legacy within death metal history. Today, many fans look back and realize that Joe Bench represented something bigger than just great musicianship. She quietly broke barriers in a genre that was not always known for openness, and proving that heavy metal has always had hidden stories behind its loud sound and fierce image. 11. Freddie Mercury. When people think about larger-than-life performers in rock history, Freddie Mercury immediately comes to mind. As the legendary frontman of Queen, he brought theatrical energy, powerful vocals, and an unforgettable stage presence that influenced generations of musicians, including many in heavy metal. Bands across the metal world have often cited Queen as an inspiration, especially because of Mercury's dramatic style and fearless performance approach. Freddie Mercury's identity was complex, and over the years, his life became closely connected with conversations around LGBTQ representation in music. While the heavy metal scene developed its own identity later, many of its performers grew up watching Mercury command massive audiences with confidence and charisma. His willingness to challenge expectations about appearance, performance, and identity helped reshape how rock stars could present themselves on stage. Queen's music combined strong guitar work, operatic elements, and massive choruses that later influenced glam metal and hard rock bands. Songs filled stadiums stadiums with energy, and Mercury's voice often carried a sense of grandeur that matched the dramatic side of heavy music culture. His impact extended far beyond a single genre, reaching artists who wanted to create music that felt bold and unforgettable. As listeners look back on the history of rock and metal, Freddie Mercury's influence becomes impossible to ignore. His presence helped open creative doors and showed that individuality could stand proudly at the center of powerful music, leaving a mark that continues to echo through heavy music scenes today. 10. Roddy Bottum Faith. No More helped redefine what heavy music could sound like, mixing metal, funk, alternative rock, and experimental elements into something unique. Within that creative storm was Roddy Bottum, the band's keyboardist, whose work added atmosphere and depth to the group's signature style. At a time when keyboards were not always common in heavier bands, Bottum helped prove they could play an essential role in shaping a powerful sound. Roddy Bottum also became one of the earliest openly gay musicians connected to heavy music scenes. He came out publicly during the early years of the band's success, long before conversations about LGBTQ representation became more visible in rock and metal culture. For many fans discovering this part of his story later, it revealed how some pioneers were already challenging stereotypes decades ago. Faith No More's music stood out because it refused to follow a single formula. The band moved effortlessly between aggressive riffs and unexpected melodies, which attracted listeners from both metal and alternative audiences. Bottum's musical contributions were a key part of the versatility, helping create songs that felt both heavy and experimental. Over time, his openness became an important moment in the broader history of heavy music culture. Roddy Bottum showed that artists in even the loudest and most unconventional bands could also quietly reshape how the community viewed identity. His presence in the scene highlighted how heavy music has always included stories that fans only fully appreciate years later. 9. Billie Joe Armstrong. The explosion of punk rock in the 1990s helped shape a new generation of heavy music fans, and Billie Joe Armstrong became one of the central figures in that movement. As the frontman of Green Day, he brought raw energy, fast guitar-driven songs, and a rebellious spirit that influenced countless listeners who later explored heavier genres like alternative metal and punk-influenced hard rock. Billie Joe Armstrong has openly identified as bisexual since the 1990s, something he spoke about long before such discussions became more common in mainstream music interviews. For fans looking back today, it highlights how artists connected to heavy music scenes were already opening doors for more honest conversations about identity within rock culture. Green Day's music often combined catchy melodies with powerful emotion, creating songs that connected deeply with audiences around the world. Their success introduced many young listeners to guitar-driven music that later led them toward heavier bands and underground metal scenes. In this way, Armstrong's influence reached far beyond just punk rock. As time passed, his role in music history became clearer. Billie Joe Armstrong helped shape the culture surrounding modern rock and heavy music, while also representing authenticity and openness. His presence in this list reflects how the world of heavy music has always included influential artists who quietly changed expectations while continuing to create powerful, unforgettable songs. 8. Mina Caputo. Heavy metal has always been filled with intense emotion, and few bands captured that feeling as powerfully as Life of Agony. Their music blended alternative metal with deeply personal themes, creating songs that connected strongly with listeners who were searching for something real inside heavy music. At the center of that sound was Mina Caputo, a vocalist whose voice carried both aggression and vulnerability, helping the band stand out during the rise of heavy music in the 1990s. For many years, fans knew Mina Caputo primarily through the band's success and unforgettable performances. However, in 2011, she publicly came out as transgender, sharing a deeply personal journey that had remained private for much of her earlier career. This moment became significant within the heavy music world because it showed that even artists who helped define the genre were navigating their own hidden struggles. Life of Agony's songs often explored pain, identity, and emotional conflict, themes that later felt even more meaningful when listeners understood Mina Caputo's story. Her honesty brought new attention to conversations about acceptance within metal and alternative music scenes that had not always been welcoming in the past. Over time, her role in heavy music became more than just musical influence. Mina Caputo helped demonstrate that authenticity could exist within one of the loudest and most intense genres in the world. Her presence continues to inspire fans and musicians who believe that heavy music should reflect real human experiences alongside its powerful sound. 7. Otep Shamaya. The heavy music scene has always had artists who refuse to stay quiet, and Otep Shamaya became one of the most outspoken voices in modern metal. As the founder and frontwoman of the band Otep, she built a reputation for aggressive performances, intense lyrics, and music that tackled political and social issues head-on. Her presence in the nu metal and alternative metal world brought a different kind of energy that many fans had not seen before. Otep Shamaya has been openly lesbian throughout her career, and her visibility became important in a genre that often struggled with representation. While many musicians focused only on the sound of heavy music, she used both music and public platforms to speak about identity, equality, and personal freedom. This approach made her stand out not only as a metal artist, but also as a cultural voice within the community. The band's music mixes heavy riffs with spoken word elements and emotionally charged themes. That combination created a style that felt raw and confrontational, matching the fearless personality behind it. Fans who connected with Otep's music often appreciated how honest and unapologetic it felt. As heavy music continued to evolve, artists like Otep Shamaya helped push the genre toward greater openness. Her role showed that metal could be a space where different voices and experiences could exist without losing its power or intensity. And the impact of that visibility continues to shape how newer generations of fans view the culture surrounding heavy music. 6. David Bowie Long. Before many modern metal artists began experimenting with image and theatrical performance, David Bowie was already transforming what a rock star could be. Known for constantly reinventing himself, he introduced bold fashion, dramatic stage personas, and music that blurred the lines between genres. While Bowie was not strictly a heavy metal performer, his influence on glam rock and later glam metal bands became impossible to ignore. David Bowie openly discussed being bisexual during the early part of his career, which was groundbreaking for the music world at the time. In an era when most performers avoided such conversations, his honesty challenged expectations and expanded how artists could present themselves publicly. Many musicians in heavy music later adopted similar ideas about creativity, individuality, and freedom of expression. His music combined powerful guitars, emotional storytelling, and theatrical presentation that inspired bands who would later dominate hard rock and metal stages. The glam metal movement, in particular, drew heavily from Bowie's fearless approach to identity and performance. As fans look back on the development of heavy music culture, Bowie's influence becomes clearer with time. He helped create an environment where artists felt free to experiment not only with sound but also with identity and image. That impact reached far into the metal world, are proving that some of the most important changes in heavy music history began long before the genre fully took shape. 5. Doug Pinnick. Progressive and alternative metal gained a unique voice through the band King's X, and Doug Pinnick played a huge role in shaping that sound. Known for his powerful vocals and distinctive bass playing, he helped create music that blended heavy riffs with soulful melodies and thoughtful lyrics. King's X stood apart from many bands in the heavy music scene because their songs carried both musical complexity and emotional depth. Doug Pinnick came out as gay in the late 1990s, something that surprised parts of the rock and metal community at the time. While he had already built respect as a musician, his openness revealed another side of the heavy music world that had often remained hidden. For fans who admired his work, it showed that the genre included voices and experiences that did not always match the stereotypes associated with metal culture. Throughout his career, Pinnock continued creating music with honesty and intensity. His vocal style added warmth and strength to the band's sound, while his songwriting explored themes of faith, identity, and personal struggle. That combination helped King's X gain a loyal following among listeners who appreciated music that felt meaningful as well as heavy. As the history of heavy music continues to unfold, Doug Pinnock's story stands as a reminder that some of the most influential artists were also quietly changing how the community viewed identity and authenticity within the metal world. 4. Gall black metal has long carried a reputation for mystery, intensity, and a fiercely guarded culture. Within that world, Gall became one of the most talked about figures, known for his commanding presence as a vocalist for Gorgoroth and later projects. He helped define the dark atmosphere that made Norwegian black metal so influential across the heavy music world. His performances and personality created an image that many fans associated with the extreme edge of the genre. What surprised many listeners was that Gall later revealed he was gay, something he spoke about publicly in 2008. For a scene that had often been viewed as rigid and uncompromising, this moment sparked strong reactions and conversations throughout the metal community. Some fans were shocked, while others began to see the genre in a new light, realizing that the people behind the music were more complex than the stereotypes surrounding black metal. Despite the controversy, Gall continued creating music and remained a respected figure in extreme metal. His artistic vision and unique vocal style helped shape the sound of bands that pushed black metal into new territories. Over time, the discussion around his identity became part of a broader shift in how fans understood the culture of heavy music. Looking back now, his story highlights how even the most intense corners of metal have always included hidden narratives. Gall's place in heavy music history reflects both his musical influence and the unexpected ways the genre has evolved. 3. Rob Halford. Few voices in heavy metal are as iconic as Rob Halford's. As the legendary frontman of Judas Priest, he helped shape the very sound and image of the genre, from powerful vocals that soared above roaring guitars to the leather and metal aesthetic that became a signature look in heavy metal. Halford played a major role in defining what the world now recognizes as classic metal culture. For decades, fans admired his stage presence and influence without fully knowing an important part of his personal life. In 1998, Rob Halford publicly came out as gay during a television interview, a moment that became historic within the heavy metal community. Many listeners were surprised because metal had long been associated with a hyper-masculine image, and his revelation challenged that assumption in a very visible way. What made this moment even more powerful was that Halford had already become one of the most respected figures in metal history. His openness showed that one of the genre's biggest icons had been part of the LGBTQ community all along. Rather than diminishing his status, it strengthened the understanding that authenticity and strength could exist together in heavy music. Over time, Rob Halford's story became one of the most important examples of how the metal world has gradually become more open. His influence continues to inspire both musicians and fans who see heavy metal as a place where individuality and powerful music can exist side by side. 2. Brian Molko. Brian Molko may not come from traditional heavy metal roots, yet his influence quietly reached many corners of the heavier music world. As the vocalist and guitarist of Placebo, he built a sound that blended alternative rock, dark atmospheres, and emotional intensity. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, many fans who listened to metal and hard rock also discovered Placebo because the music carried a raw energy that felt just as powerful as heavier genres. What made Brian Molko especially notable in conversations like this is his openness about being bisexual at a time when many artists still avoided speaking about identity. His androgynous style, haunting voice, and fearless stage presence challenged the traditional image of what a rock or metal frontman was supposed to look like. For audiences used to the rigid masculinity often associated with heavy music scenes, Molko represented something different and unexpected. Placebo's songs explored themes like isolation, desire, and self-discovery, topics that resonated deeply with listeners who felt misunderstood or out of place. Many musicians in the alternative metal and gothic metal scenes later cited the band as an influence because of how emotional honesty was mixed with dark, guitar-driven soundscapes. Over the years, Brian Molko's presence helped normalize individuality within heavier music communities. Even though Placebo existed slightly outside the strict boundaries of metal, the band's impact crossed genres and inspired fans who were drawn to music that felt both intense and deeply personal. His story fits naturally into the broader narrative of artists who quietly reshaped expectations within heavy music culture. 1. Paul Masvidal. The world of progressive metal has always been driven by musicians who are willing to explore new ideas, and Paul Masvidal became one of those visionaries. As a founding member of Cynic, he helped build a style of metal that combined technical skill, philosophical themes, and atmospheric soundscapes. Their music felt different from the traditional image of heavy metal, attracting fans who were searching for depth and innovation within the genre. For many years, listeners focused mainly on Masvidal's creativity as a musician. However, in 2014, he publicly came out as gay, alongside bandmate Sean Reinert. This moment became significant because it revealed that some of the most respected figures in progressive metal were also part of a story that had rarely been discussed openly in the community. Masvidal's approach to music has always emphasized growth and exploration. His work blends heavy guitar work with reflective themes that challenge listeners to think differently about what metal can express. That same sense of honesty and openness carried into his personal life, reinforcing the idea that authenticity can strengthen artistic expression. Over time, Paul Masvidal's influence has expanded beyond just his music. His story represents a broader shift in heavy metal, where fans are beginning to recognize the diverse identities that have always existed behind the scenes. His place at the top of this list highlights how some of metal's most forward-thinking artists were also quietly reshaping the culture of the genre. And there you have it. 24 heavy metal icons whose stories prove that even in the loudest, wildest world of music, some truths stayed hidden in plain sight. These legends didn't just shape heavy metal with their sound, they also challenged what people expected behind the scenes, often in ways fans never realized. But it makes you wonder, how many other rock and metal stars might still have stories the world hasn't heard yet? If this surprised you, hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because more untold stories from the world of music are coming your way. And tell me in the comments, which one shocked you the most? 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 Shocked you